Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and joining me today, all the way from New York City, is Mr. Henry Weingarten. Henry, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, of course.
Now, today we're going to be speaking to Henry about the phenomenal work that he's been doing within the field of financial astrology for many years. But before we get into that, for those of you who this is your first time joining us here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast, this is a podcast where I bring you interviews from astrologers from around the world who are not only changing their own lives through their astrological practice, but who are also changing the landscape of our astrology itself. So if you are interested in being a part of these conversations and also just listening to some of these amazing interviews that I do with these amazing astrologers, take a moment, go down below, hit on the like button, and then also hit subscribe so that you can be a part of the magic and the momentum that we're building here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast. Now, Henry, I am really excited to be talking to you for several reasons. One of which is that my mentor was once a student of yours, and not just was he once a student of yours, you were his first astrological teacher. And by my mentor, I'm referring to Mr. Gary Kristen from over there at Astro-World. And so when he mentioned you one day in class, I was like, but Henry and I were friends on Facebook. And I never knew what your connection was with him. So I'm really excited to be speaking to you because I view you as a teacher of my teacher, and it's really an honor to be sharing this space with you right now. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
So Henry, tell us a little bit about not only how you came to being in astrology, but also how you came to play such a pivotal role in astrology in the late 1960s, and then how that moved you into becoming the financial astrologer that you are today.
Okay, so let's start with the fact that in 1967, but actually it took to the spring equinox of 1968, I set up the East Village Astrology Service on East 6th Street, 306 East 6th Street. And what I had done at that time, and I think it's probably also true today, it was very difficult to find a qualified astrologer. Many of the people who were practicing or called themselves astrologers were not adequately trained, and or were gypsies, etc. So I put out an ad in the East Village Other for astrologers, and I was interviewing a lot of them, people like Eleanor Bach, for example. We tested them, and we had a certain number, and then I was a student at the time of New York University, and I set up the center where people could go and get qualified astrology readings. And then once we did that, I expanded it also to a bookstore because there was no place you could get books. So we set up a bookstore. And then we realized there weren't enough good books, so we set up a publishing company called ASI Publishers at the time with my associate, who was Barbara Summerfield, a student and then an associate. And then that went on and became the New York Astrology Center as it got bigger and as we moved uptown. We also then went into computers. In those days, when I first started out, if you were an astrologer and did 40 hours work, 20 hours were calculating and 12 hours interpreting. With the advantage of computer programs, and I was one of the first Commodore dealers in New York. I was one of the first Apple dealers in New York. At the time, we were computerizing the Board of Education, ATT, ITT, Federal Reserve Bank, in order to support our astrology work. So we were doing that. Anyway, so we're fast. Oh, excuse me. And then we also set up the National Astrological Society, which when you're saying New York, we did conferences all across the United States in many different cities with 500 people on the average. We did a conference in New York, NYU, with over 1,000 people at NYU. Anyway, fast forward this. We had to practice, obviously. And a friend of mine, Charles Harvey, who predicted the 1987 crash a year in advance to the day, as well as, of course, other people like Arch Crawford, who did 6 months in advance, at least publicly, that I knew of. Anyway, I was in the New York Astrology Center at the time, and I'm reading a story about Andrew Krieger. And Andrew Krieger at the time had just made his bank $600 million. and was paid $6 million. And he was pissed off that he got paid so little. Anyway, I'm reading this article, and all of a sudden I said, wait a second, I'm an astrologer, I can do this. I predict for people every day. So that I then spent the next 2 years learning more about financial astrology. And actually, I should backtrack about why I became an astrologer, because you asked me an earlier question.
Mm-hmm.
And this started probably when I was about 6 years old. I had an interest in astronomy, but I lost interest when I got into astrophysics. I was a math major and a math prodigy, got 800 on my SATs. I was also interested in psychology. And as you probably know, one of the definitions of astrology is a mathematical psychology based on astronomy. I remember being in a bookshelf that was maybe 8 feet high, and I was going over to reach for a book, and 3/4 of the way, I had a lightning flash intuition. And it wasn't that I was interested in math, psychology, or astronomy. It was astrology, which was the intersection of all three areas of mathematical psychology based on astronomy, and that was going to be my life's work. And so from then on, I knew I was a teenager at the time I would become an astrologer. So that's sort of why we set up the East Village Astrology Service, etc. Anyway, I was rather fortunate because at the time we were a very small company, maybe doing $1 million, $2 million worth of business because of the bookstore, the publishing company, the computer company, etc. But one of the gentlemen who at that time was at the world headquarters of Payne Weber or Merrill Lynch. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was Merrill Lynch actually first. And we were a very small account, and he was the head brokerage group. But he saw this company called ASI Computers, and ASI was Astrology Services International. Basically, I was very fortunate because John Trepanier was my first mentor in the business. And one of the things people have to know is that financial astrology is a dual specialty. You need to know both finance as well as astrology. Just like if I'm medical astrology, you need to know medicine as well as astrology. And it turned out his wife happened to be a healer, a natural healer. So when he saw Astrology Service International, he came to me, even though we were much too small a company to deal with them. Anyway, and at that time, markets were very different. So what we did was two things. One was we would try to figure out a day that the market would move 10 points, which was a big move then, not like today. At which point you could make $1 on the OEX, and we got to about 75, 80%. It became a sort of worthless exercise. But our big thing was, how could I establish my reputation? Because people had just done the Tokyo market, actually the US market crash. So the question was, how could I get a reputation in the field? Even though I'd been an astrologer for 20 years. So at that time, everybody was losing their shorting Tokyo, which was terribly overpriced. So we made a forecast, which we spent a lot of time on, about when the Tokyo market would crash, when the next US recession was, and I forget the third one. Anyway, I then sent it out to about 100 press organizations. Barron's happened to have kept the story. And when it happened, they said, hey, this guy called us over 2 years in advance within a week, which was pretty good. In fact, in those days, we couldn't even go make that prediction directly on Tokyo because the markets were extremely different at that time. And the person I was dealing with very wealthy people. They didn't care if the market went up and down 5 or 10%. They wanted big stuff like the Tokyo market crash, like the US market crash, like both Mexican crises that we predicted, the US Mideast war, which we predicted 2 years in advance to within 4 hours, stuff like that. So we were doing only the big forecasts for them because that's what they were interested in. Anyway, we fast forwarded. We tried to set up an astrologers fund because we thought it was obvious that 1/3 of the population believes in astrology, and therefore anyone with a decent record would do well. Unfortunately, none of the big houses wanted to do it. Went off to Luxembourg. A couple of years later, went with Credit Agricole, had tremendous fund managers behind me, but then it got blocked, obviously, due to prejudice in astrology. So we basically set up our own fund at the time, and also became an RIA, a CTA, etc. And now it's a small family office. But we've been doing astrology for over 50 years. We have a little experience and have what we consider a world-class track record in terms of forecasting markets. Nobody I know has a better one. I know people with equal records, but I don't know if anyone with a better record. I could, on my website, you can see all the forecasts we've made. These
All
days, for the public, we give a forecast, although we do trading all the time. Today we did, for example, a major short in the marketplace, which is one of the pivotal times. Um, but in general, since 1996 in the website, every year we give out our forecasts, and it's between 60 to 80%, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And if you make 50%, you make money anyway. So,
And Henry, so since the organization is called the Astrologers Fund, what exactly is your main goal or objective?
well, initially it was to have an astrologers fund, which we didn't
Yeah.
do, and then it became a fund, a QEP fund, which means you needed $5 million net worth to invest in. And then we also set up some newsletters and et cetera. But basically, it's the same promise that every financial advisor gives, which is to make more money with less risk. And given the fact there are three factors in the marketplace, one of which is fundamentals, one of which is technicals, and we were an early MTA member, and the third is what's called behavioral economics. But when I was a student, I'd wonder, why did the market go up when the bonds went up, and the next day the market went down when the bonds went up? It wasn't because the bonds went up. There was something else going on. And that was basically the astrology, or part of it was the astrology, about why people reacted to news a certain way. So basically, we do that. I remember someone like Robert Hand, Robert Hand years ago said that astrology would get its mainstream acceptance through financial astrology because people didn't care in the markets how you got your information. You could do it with dartboards, you can do it with a monkey, but as long as you're more right than wrong. And in general, so my goal these days is, well, of course, I'm much older now, so it's not the same. But I will tell you this, in my viewpoint, in professions, there are 4 stages of life. I'm in the 4th. The first stage is you want to make money, or at least in the finance area. And after you do that for a while, you go to the second stage, or generally speaking, is you want to make money and you want to have fun. Okay, so a lot of people go that. And then if you stick around a little bit longer, you want to make money, you want to have fun, but you want to do good in the world. So then you get a little older, like my age, and you still want to make money, you still want to have fun, you want to do good in the world, but you don't want to work hard. So we don't want to work hard these days.
I will cherish that for the rest of my life, and and I'm probably in the 3rd stage, which may be unfortunate, but I definitely feel as if it's important, especially in astrology, for astrologers to be paid for their time and for their services, because I think that so much of astrology falls into this blurry space of entertainment, and it has become a part of what people consider entertainment for such a long time that it isn't something that a lot of people think should be invested in. So I think that the work that people like you are doing is really important for the larger astrological community, because you are indeed showing that this is an actual career that has actual, tangible, concrete implications in the world. So, I mean, thank you very much for blazing that trail.
Okay.
Now, Henry, give us a working definition of what financial astrology is on its most technical level for the person who is actually working with markets, and then what is financial astrology for the lay astrologer who isn't working with markets, but they're just working one-on-one with your average Joe client?
Okay, first of all, I think you have to understand there's primarily 2 types of financial astrologers out there, especially when we're talking about stock markets. There are people who have come from the financial community, probably from technical analysis primarily, and they do mostly cycle analysis, where they're looking at various planetary cycles and then relating them to events, market crashes, market rallies, etc., market trends. Then you have people like myself who've come from the astrology viewpoint, who will do natal horoscopes of the New York Stock Exchange, will do natal horoscopes of IBM or Apple, who will do China's horoscope, will do the horoscope of gold, silver. We'll do some cycles, but primarily, or at least as important, we'll do genealogical astrology as well. I obviously do more of the second than the first because I was trained as an astrologer for some 20 years before I did that. But again, there's two different sides of it. Basically, people in finance do it for timing, for a large extent, and also for areas of where there may be outsized risk, either to the upside or the downside, which astrology can give you. So it depends. A lot of people integrate it. Just like in markets, many people do fundamental analysis and they do technical analysis as well. Put it together, you get better results. We like to say if you're investing, the best results come from fundamental analysis and astrology. And if you're trading, the best results come from technical analysis and astrology. In terms of astrology, part of the problem is a lot of what's in the books are not true. You know, we had our own school, the New York School of Astrology, where we had a very different viewpoint. I mean, there's a lot of make-believe stuff in astrology, which is sad. But in finance, it's if I make a forecast for you, 8 years from now, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But in the market, we can forecast every single day. We get to see if we're right or wrong every single day. And astrology is not the only factor, of course, but it is a way to see what works and what doesn't work, at least on a percentage basis. So it's a good way to test out techniques because, unfortunately, in astrology, there's a lot of things that cobwebs, as well as obviously some very serious basis to things. So it's a good way to test out concepts. And if someone wants to try to make money, and I have someone I know, a friend of mine on Facebook, who's starting to trade now. She thinks it's very simple, and she has beginner's luck, which is nice. And I initially said, well, if you're going to do this, start with play money. After you get it going, then put some real money in, etc. But again, most financial astrologers are unfortunately too weak in finance and don't really understand what's going on in the markets, and therefore some of their forecasts are wrong. Now, in 1987, after people like Charles Harvey and Arch made their forecasts, everybody and their brother was doing financial astrology for a while. And I was a part of a network called FNN, which was Financial News Network. And I think there were about 20 financial astrologers who were doing it, but the guy got such bad results after 6 months, he stopped it because it was like listening to the news, up, down,
Yeah.
people do all that stuff. So effectively, you have to make sure you have a serious background in what you're doing on the finance side, which is where most people are weak, as well as to practice it. But astrology is certainly an edge. There's no question. Even some very simple techniques and transits will tell you some things that you wouldn't get otherwise from markets. We like to say we can identify between 20 to 30% of market surprises because of astrology, which you could not do otherwise. Or I don't know of any way to do it otherwise. Maybe there are ways.
And then, Henry, for the astrologer working one-on-one with clients, does the financial astrology that you practice also filter into one-on-one client work, or is it only for markets and large organizations?
Well, first of all, every astrologer normally is asked two questions about love and money. I mean, those are the two things, some variation of it that's asked.
Yeah.
So basically, most astrologers have two issues, one presented to them, and they're variations of love and money. In terms of markets, there are two ways we do mostly financial astrology, as opposed to personal, which of course one can do. One is actually having the horoscope of the New York Stock Exchange or the London Stock Exchange or whatever. And I remember one of our first exercises when I was doing work privately for Merrill Lynch and Payne Weber, I'd be getting paid like $10,000 to say, like, should we be investing in IBM this year, or should we invest, that sort of thing. So one is the market itself, the broad market, because if you're doing individuals, you have to realize you're subsumed by other horoscopes. And whatever the broad market's doing is about 50% of a market's action, 25% comes from the sector, and only 25% is individual. So it's important to have that both bottom up and top down. But the other thing is doing horoscopes for companies. We work for private and public companies where we do astrology for them. There's a client of ours in the entertainment space where we'll be doing, at some point, probably some of the release of some of their films when they get released, because you get a better result. We'll be at some point doing some of the timing of when to do important decisions, not everything. Because if you do a horoscope all the time, we used to say that electional astrology is very important, but if you're doing it for every single thing, sooner or later, when you want to go to the bathroom, you're going to miss it because problem. But for big things, obviously, astrology is a good tool to double check. So I would say the financial area that's probably better for most astrologers would be really working for businesses, public or private. A, because they pay a lot more. We used to get paid a lot more by businesses than individuals. But to me, having an astrologer is just as important as having an accountant or a lawyer, and can save you or make you as much money. I would tend to look at them if I were an individual astrologist. Is again, business people can pay more, unless you have very wealthy clients. We've had some of that. Very wealthy, multi-million-dollar clients, and of course they can pay.
So, Henry, now moving it into the realm of your personal life as an astrologer with your own natal chart, how does your larger work with financial astrology impact you personally when you take a look at your natal chart and you see some of the financial promises within your own nativity? How does it impact you?
Okay, first of all, I'm a Leo, a very textbook Leo. Only about 1 out of 3 people are really that much like their sun signs, but I'm one of those 3. And I like to be right all the time, or at least so astrology makes me maintain that viewpoint. One of the reasons for an astrologer, we get to be right a lot. Now, I've used it for important things in my life, for important trips. For example, when I got married, a friend of mine who was an astrologer, he knew myself and my wife, was delighted we were getting married. He knew both of us separately and couldn't understand anybody who could be compatible with either of us, but together he thought we should be a good match. Mm-hmm. And when he met us, he said, I've got this horoscope date, October 1st, you should use it. We looked at it, it was quite correct. I was married by an astrologer, had a stopwatch in the audience, and I think if I remember correctly, it's been a while. I think it was 6/12/12. It could be anywhere from 6/12 to 6/13 that we could have been married. So we had it done there, absolutely correct. And you see, I like to joke about this, and sort of my wife gets a little upset with this. I say, the problem is I can never get divorced because if I get divorced, it was a bad astrologers, and so it shows. Of course, that's not the case. But I mean, we obviously looked at her horoscope. I obviously looked at the time. When I would take major trips to the Orient or to China or elsewhere, I would look at it. But again, I don't look at it when I go to the bathroom. I just did it a moment ago and have a break. I don't do a horoscope like that. So astrology is important for the important things in life. Finance is important. Basically, it's a question of, it doesn't mean you can or can't do something, but it's a question of what's the cost. So for example, if it's, when you're making forecasts, it's like, too many astrologers say, let's say there's rain outside, they're going to say you're going to get wet. And now what they should say, it's raining and take an umbrella. So they very often skip that stage because the stages of astrology, as we used to teach, is the average astrologer predicts the future. A good astrologer helps plan for the future, while the great astrologer helps create the future. So you have to take this into account also financially as well, in terms of whatever financial plans you want to make and what's possible. Now, a lot of us are under the illusion of free will, and that we have total. I obviously think I have free will, but it's not totally free. If I want to become the best jockey in the world physically, I can't. If I want to become a football player, I can't. Now, in the markets, the reason I bring this up is this is the only game I know where amateurs think they beat professionals. So you have all these people who think that they can play against Goldman Sachs with all their PhDs, working 24 hours a day with supercomputers, and they're going to going to outperform them. Now, At the moment in the markets, all the Robinhood investors are doing that, but they're going to get slaughtered like they did in 2001, or they got slaughtered in 2008. It's historically, the same mistakes are made. So realize, what is your edge? Now, astrology can be an edge for you in terms of when you should do investments, when you're another thing you can do actually is you can do the astrology for traders, which we used to do way, way back, because traders can sometimes have very good judgment, sometimes they'll have very poor judgment. So you can look at the times when they made the most money, when they made the least money. When you see those patterns again, you can warn them, type of things. You can do that as well. There are obviously many ways to do astrology.
So, Henry, today, given the current state of world affairs, how do you feel financial astrology can help all of us, not just the wider public, but the astrological community, chart a path forward towards the future?
Well, the problem, now I'm going to mention another problem, is a lot of astrologers are tend to put their politics and their cultural biases into their work. So when you're talking about charting the future and creating the future, uh, for, for example, if we take politics, we've been right 9 out of the last 10 elections, and the only election we ever lost was when there were 3 people running, and it was actually a different game. We predicted Donald Trump's victory 14 months in advance of the election. And a lot of people make forecasts and they're saying this is astrology and it's not astrology. So when you're talking about creating the future, as you know, we have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction happening in around December 21st in zero Aquarius. And in my forecast, which I'm doing it, I do forecasts, I put them up annually on the YouTube. We're doing an update on July 15th. And in that section, I'm playing the old, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius number thing, because in a sense, there are a number of elements that are very Aquarian that are happening at the moment, both good and bad, quite frankly. Some of the humanitarian qualities of Aquarius, the technological qualities of Aquarius, and some of the other issues that which are not so positive that they have as well. So there is this new generation that's taking place. I mean, Jupiter and Saturn cycles every 20 years. The last 20 years, I remember being in, I think it was CNN, and someone asked for their forecast, and it was that the world was becoming more global, and telecommunications was going to become more important, which was obviously a simple but true forecast. With the new Aquarian thing, we can say that the world's becoming deglobalized, decentralized, IoT, Internet of Things, is taking place. And of course, space travel is coming back, which is pretty cool. My background, we sort of like that. I thought it was pretty weird that we didn't do anything in the last 20 years in space, so very much. So there is that element. And of course, zero Aquarius means the very beginning, because I believe with Cyril Fagan that the actual Aquarian age is 2376, give or take 100 years, so we're not quite there. But there are elements of it. And unfortunately, I think with the politics, most people, what they want isn't necessarily wrong, but I think they're at least 50 to 100 years too early, which is a bit of a problem in today's world, because I don't think they're realistic. So in terms of it, I think you can see with astrology, you know, everything is like, let's say Mars. We have a lot of Mars coming up in this year. One of the reasons why, unfortunately, defense and security companies are going to do better. But Mars is like fire. You can, the old saying is, you can cook your food with it or get burnt. And the same thing with all these planetary energies. There are positive and more positive possibilities, and there are also a lot of negative likely consequences, because most people prefer the path of least resistance, which means, you know, usually things are not going to be as good as one would hope. So in terms of envisioning things, remember, the purpose of astrology was basically to transmute and transform cosmic energies. It wasn't to sit there and make predictions. You were there to, whether it be like in Indian astrology where you use amulets, whether you do prayers, sutras, whatever. So astrology in finance, I mean, obviously you need, it's a form of, currency is a form of life. You need it, because without a lot of money, your possibilities are restricted. Totally, not that being a billionaire is going to make a difference, but certainly if you have no food, money. So astrology, it just means that you can live a more profitable life and make less mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes anyway, but you can avoid some of them.
Now, Henry, that brings me to another point that I really wanted to talk to you about. What do you feel is the role of prediction in astrology today? Because I just heard you say that astrology was never about just sitting down and making predictions. So where do you feel prediction falls within your astrological paradigm? Because undoubtedly prediction is a major part of what you do as a financial astrologer.
Oh, absolutely, it's a major part. But on the other hand, I could be working for a government and changing things. Um, the question is, well, you have to understand, first of all, astrology is not the only influence in world events. It's a major influence. It's not the only influence in markets and other things, but it is a major influence. So, of course, we make predictions. Of course, we're betting all the time when I'm trading, when I'm investing. Clearly, those are predictions. But if I'm working for a company, part of what you want to do is what else could be done? How do we mitigate some of the issues, the problems? And when you're dealing with an individual level, is how do you create your own future? How do you envision? And but again, we're sort of what astrology says is that we're not isolated from the universe. I think it was Dane Rujar who used to talk about this. That by seeing these patterns that happen, sun rising, setting, lunar patterns, you eventually realize you're not isolated entities, and we are affected by other things happening. And so rather than taking the chaos that's happening and just letting it run through us and running wild, you should take those energies and meditate or transmute them if you know how into more positive and higher vibrations, which is what priests used to do in the old days.
So, Henry, today, as we
But that's
move.
not what my clients pay me for, by the way.
Okay, so then what do your clients pay you for specifically?
Depends on the clients, but effectively, they want to be less surprised by markets. Basically, if we take even today, today is June 16th. We made our forecast is that by this June 18th to 22nd, it's a very pivotal time. Why? It's triple witching hour in the marketplaces. We have a solar eclipse, and we have the summer solstice. So it's a pretty significant time, and we think the markets are going down into August. So we're positioning ourselves. We hit the market. I don't even know where they are now, but we did a perfect day trade this morning when the markets are way up. We hit it, made some money. But we do some of our entry times based on, by looking at the horoscope of the day, by looking at other horoscopes, et cetera, that we look at, horoscope of stock exchange. So I was dealing with one of the traders, a friend of mine, and we wrote some calls this morning. They were very profitable. We may or may not take some money now. We may take it off the table later, but we came in at an absolute time where there's no risk of losing money. You want to do as much as possible. When you're trading, it's really, and investing, it's more about not losing money than making money. A lot of amateurs don't get that, but when you deal with professionals, money management is much more important. And I used to know lots of people who were right 90% of their time, 90%, and made no money. Because on that 10%, they blew it. When we used to teach, because I've taught market trading, et cetera, and we say the most important thing is money management. The least important thing is knowing where the markets are going. And the second most important thing is using the right instruments to do that. Of course, it's a good idea to know where the markets are going. It's helpful. But it's not essential, actually, to making money. Do you have any idea where the markets are going if you know markets well enough? So, but money management is extremely important. And again, that's if you're actually using money. But they pay me to have some edge in the marketplace, because what is it all about? It's what's my edge? What do I know that you don't know? And when do I know it? And astrology is a microscope and a telescope. We could talk about where the market's going to be in the next 5 minutes, or we can talk about where the market's going to be in the next 5 years with accuracy and precision. Not perfect accuracy, not perfect precision, but with some. And again, we've made forecasts 10 years out that are out to within a month. We've made forecasts 2 years out to within 4 hours. That's pretty hard to do without astrology. Maybe, and I don't know the way, but the majority are correct. Again, it depends on what you're using astrology for, but it should be to give you an edge in terms of timing and an edge in terms of what to be doing.
When you speak about things that astrologers can do to give them an edge, what are some things that you can tell our listeners and viewers who are either financial astrologers or who are just lay astrologers? What are some things that we can do as daily practices as astrologers of any persuasion that allows us to have an edge or that allows us to have insight into the future?
Well, again, this will vary based on your own horoscope. The first thing, of course, is you could look to your own horoscope. I don't tend to look at it that much, but you could look to your own horoscope to see when your judgment is more cloudy or not. For example, if I were making a major forecast and I have Jupiter on the midheaven, and I one day and I have Neptune on the midheaven and the other, I don't think they'll be exactly uh, the same um, in terms of the reliability of them. As a matter of fact, one of the interesting things about Neptune, which took me a while to learn, because I wrote a book which McGraw Hill published, and I didn't realize at the time about Neptune because the markets hate uncertainty. It's something you hear over and over again, which means they hate Neptune. Right or wrong, they hate Neptune. And I didn't know that. I was looking more at Jupiter and Saturn and saying, Jupiter's up, Saturn's down. Of course, it's not quite like that. Uh, but we made probably more of our money later, not on Jupiter and Saturn, but on Uranus and Neptune. Uranus is surprises. So where do you make your money is when you're surprising the market. And when there's uncertainty, people are very unhappy. So it tends to generally have a negative aspect, although it has wonderful spiritual implications. So one thing you can do is look at your own horoscope. Another thing is the horoscope of whatever your instrument is that you're looking at, whether it be your business, whether it be the stock market, to get some sense of whether it's going to be more favorable or unfavorable. You can also do astrolocality, because obviously astrology is not only a map of time, but a place. I remember we used to do the East Village Astrology Service, and I happened to have an angular Jupiter in both Australia and Brazil, and both of the places where I did my most business in those days, back in the 1960s, where I was selling books to both places. So you don't have to be in a place to actually get the advantage of it. Again, I can't answer that easily because it depends on what you're doing. If you're trading, you could look at the time you're trading for better days, not better days. I mean, that's what a lot of professionals do. But of course, again, if you're a professional trader, you're trading all the time anyway. But you would know certain times when you would up your bet and when you'd lower your bet. It's more likely the case. I will tell you this. There's no question in my mind that if I didn't do, if I were I've done the heavy trading that I've done in my life and investing, and I didn't have astrology, I'd be a very heavy drinker because I wouldn't know what the hell's going on. But thanks to astrology, I can relax a lot more.
And I think in relation to the question I was asking earlier, it was more so, should we be really trying to sharpen our skills in terms of looking at transits? Should we be really trying to sharpen our skills in looking at a particular sort of technique or method? Or what is it you think we should really be trying to hone in on and key in on within our astrological practice that allows us to have, as you call it, an edge up?
Well, the first thing is you have to remember astrology is a symbolic plus an observational science, and therefore you have to test what you're doing. Forget what you're using. Like people ask me, do I follow this person, that person? I said, no. We did the New York School of Astrology, which was at that days in the 60s, we combined German astrology with Indian astrology, with English astrology, with Italian, with all sorts of things. We came up with our own synopsis, and then we applied it to the markets. So the most important thing is to test what you're doing. So traditionally, when people first start doing something, if you're looking at big things, you look at big events, 1929 crash, 1987 crash, Tokyo market crash, blah, blah, blah. See if you can find it with your techniques. If you can't, then don't worry about it. Then you might look to something else. So whatever it is you're looking for, and for example, we predicted, we have gold traders. We probably have a world-class record on gold. We predicted the Bryan disaster way back. And we did this because we looked at the horoscopes of companies that had made all their money in gold and silver and diamonds, that were the most successful. And then we looked at what were the astrological factors they had in common, and then we could then apply it to other things. So the most important thing is to test your knowledge. Forget what you've learned. Forget what applies to individuals. Test it and see if it works. If it works, use it. If it's not, you better find something else, because a number of the things that people use don't work, in my opinion.
Okay. I think you and I are going to have a private conversation on the side about what those things are that you think don't work, because I think that's a really important conversation to have.
I'll give you one right now, which will tell you about this. I'm going to tell you, and again, remember, you're speaking to an astrologer who's done this his whole life and believes in it. So I remember reading one of the Greek horoscope books way, way, way back. probably Neugebauer. Anyway, and it was telling how you could determine if somebody was a great person. Now, they were dealing primarily with upper middle class people who went to their astrologer when it became democratic and wasn't only for the king and queen. So the first thing I naturally did was I did all these calculations for myself, being a Leo, and lo and behold, naturally, I'm a great person. So I said, cool. And then I said, you know what, let me think about it. Let me do this for my wife. And did all the calculations, did, a whole bunch of things. And you know what? She was a great person. I said, great. Then chose a random horoscope, and it was also great. And then I took a look at the analysis underneath, and there was nobody that wasn't going to be great by those calculations. Then you have situations like in the Middle Ages when astrologers didn't have much business, and they would take a cow and move it from one field to another. And so the person would come to them, they do an electional chart and say, oh, the cow's in that field. And the point is that some of these things become crystal balls. Now, I have nothing against it. I have a strong Neptune. I think astrology can be a crystal. First of all, I think as a mathematician and a scientist, I believe that some of this can be computerized, but there's certainly nothing wrong with psychic abilities. And a horoscope can be a way to focus your psychic abilities. On the other hand, there are other things that psychics can be wrong about as well. But if we're talking about the science of astrology, as opposed to the practice, which is an art and science, then there are things in there that just simply do not work or are meaningless because, you have the old saw in astrology. One indication is a possibility, 2 is a probability, 3 is a certainty. So, okay, that's the case. But if you have 80 different calculations, you're always going to have 3 that go in one direction or another. So you've got to look at the data for how accurate is it? How precise is it? It's like saying today the market's going to go up. Well, the market goes up 66% of the time. So if I'm flipping a coin, I'll be right with not looking at my horoscope. I got to identify the 1/3 where it goes down better and not do it. So anyway, the issue is really to test out what you're doing against something objective, because the first thing we used to do, like when we had our school way back, let's say we check 20 marriages, we look at what they had in common, then you make the forecast going forward, or 20 deaths, or 20 births, or whatever it is you're looking at. You've got to look at a lot of data, which is a lot easier today than it was when we started out, see what sort of factors are often in common, and then going forward, because astrology is primarily pattern analysis, which most things are. There are very few perfect patterns, because you're never going to have the same horoscope twice. 2 seconds from now is totally 2 seconds ago. But there are factors that are in common. There are factors we can use. So the real thing is to be objective about it. And then the difference is you can't give a cold reading in astrology. What's a cold reading? A gypsy cold reading? Oh, you're a very talented person and you're misunderstood and blah, blah, blah. Just to do with everybody else. You can't get. You can get away with that in counseling, so to speak.
Yeah.
But you can't get away with the markets because they end a certain place at a certain time, and the question is whether you're outperforming. A lot of people used to think, well, I'm making money, therefore I'm good. Well, if the markets go up 20% and you're up 15%, you're not doing well. But on a risk-adjusted basis, you might be, because it's not a question of how much money you make, but for what risk. And a finance person does things on a risk-adjusted basis. So you have to take all these factors into account.
So what I hear you calling for, Henry, is for a more objective and a less biased approach to astrology, because it seems like you're saying that we should practice what's effective, whether or not it has affiliation with a particular school or a particular period of time. We should practice what works. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And let me ask you a question. Astrology is unfortunate. It's better than it used to be. But do you want to practice medicine the way it was 100 years ago or 500 years ago? Do you want your doctor to do that? I mean, every time I see a movie in the 1930s in a hospital, I say, thank God I've got NYU nearby, because I don't want to be in any of those places. Now, that doesn't mean, for example, acupuncture, which I think is extremely valuable. I wouldn't mind going to some 500-year-old guy who was a practitioner, because I'm sure he's doing a great job. On the other hand, if I were run over in the street and my leg was bleeding, I'd prefer a modern doctor. So it's not that there aren't things there that aren't very valuable in many different traditions, whether it be Indian or Western or Chinese, etc. But the point is, astrology has not been subject to the rigorous scientific scrutiny. Usually there's either bullshit people who think it's garbage and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Um, and things like all glands work. I mean, there are people now trying to start, because of computers and the low cost, are actually doing some better research than was done 50 years ago. But the point is, there are things in there that are nonsense, which is okay because you can always throw in some nonsense ideas. But the question is whether you have something that really works. And that's what you got to do, because otherwise you're really being dishonest.
I think that analogy that you just drew between, yes, loving acupuncture, but loving acupuncture for specific reasons, and still acknowledging the fact that for other reasons, you're definitely going to want to go to a modern Western doctor. I think that that's really the clearest thing I've ever heard, or the clearest analogy I've ever been exposed to in relation to, yes, we have so much things that are valuable about our traditional approaches to astrology, and we also have so much innovation that's occurred within the modern era that is useful and that is beneficial. So I think that that's a really balanced approach, and it really contextualizes our relationship between tradition and innovation in a wonderful way. And I'm really grateful to be able to hear that from you. So thank you for that.
Sure, my pleasure.
Henry, if our listeners and viewers want to get in contact with you, whether or not for their personal astrological concerns, or whether or not they either want to learn from you or work with you in some way, how can they find you?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, we do have a website, afund.com. We do post some things, a newsletter, Wall Street Next Week. As for personal work, I haven't done it for about 18 years. We're very, very, very expensive. If I told you the number, you'd jump out of your seat. So we're not really taking on personal clients, or even actually other things these days. As for teaching, I don't know. We periodically got asked. We used to have a school. It was a New York School of Astrology. Unfortunately, we stopped it after a few years because so many people, it was a 4-year school, but so many people after a year or two would drop out and start practicing and saying that, they studied, that we sort of stopped that because it takes a long time to learn it properly. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. But in any case, the place to start would be the website. There's information there. It's certainly useful.
So I'm going to put that information down in the description box below so that all of our listeners and viewers can connect with you.
Sure.
Henry, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. And truthfully, this has really been a stimulating discussion that we've had. And I'm sure that our listeners and viewers are also going to feel the same way. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with me.
And I will give you the line I used to use at the end of every talk. In a long time, I forgot about this one. At the end of every time we'd have a discussion on financial astrology, I would always ask, can you afford not to have a financial astrologer in your future?
Well, I'm starting to think I can. So, so thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And all the best to you. And for our listeners and viewers, whether or not this is your 100th show here with us on the True Divination podcast, or if this is your first, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing this space with us. I receive your comments, your feedback, your insights, and your likes, and I really do appreciate it, truthfully. And to continue to spread the good news, what we're doing over here on the True Divination podcast, please make sure that you subscribe to the video, as well as share these interviews with your other astrological colleagues and friends, because the world needs to know about these wonderful conversations that we're having with intelligent astrologers here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast. So until next time, I love you, be well, stay safe, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Okay, Henry. This was really good.